From within the glowing aura at the town center, a colossal pillar of blood suddenly rose, looming over the residents among the festering hands of ooze. Then, a fateful roll of the dice led to a large crowd of around 200 people being plunged into darkness as a gaping hole ripped through the earth beneath them. Among that crowd were 3 familiar faces to the player party. Cormac Neelis. Rather than panic and stare back at an enemy that cared not for his pleas, Cormac, needing to reconcile some guilt, moved his gaze toward the depressing sight of the fallen detention center where he assumes Rildilga met her unfortunate end. A whelp in his throat raised while giving himself but a moment to mourn her, reflecting with anguish on how wrong he and Jarvis were to dismiss Rildilga's concerns. She had tried so hard to press the both of them to prepare a backup plan with her, just in case things on the picket line turned violent, incessantly pushing the need for community defense. But they thought it was a terrible idea, doomed to cause escalation born from paranoia, rather than a valid and learned life experience from her criminal past and, as an outsider, trafficked into the Empire. Cormac knew this would not be something Rildilga would take any pleasure in being correct about. Cormac sighs, swallowing the guilt down like a shot of too potent whiskey, where the burn lingers too long for comfort. He only takes relief in the fact that Rildilga hopefully didn't have to suffer in the collapse, and is morbidly thankful she didn't have to live to see the hell befalling their fucked up but beloved town. Wiping away his tears for her, Cormac's eyes dart around the scenery of Zahmbieu one last time to search out his dear friend Jarvis. But he couldn't find him. As the ground fell beneath his feet and darkness stole his light, Cormac shouted in surprise, tried desperately to reach for Hadul, who should have been nearby, but regrettably wasn't. Cursing himself for not being able to support Hadul in this moment facing death, Cormac quickly moved his hands into prayer, and making his final urgent request of the gods, he prayed for Jarvis, whether he lives or dies here, that he is able to find peace and forgive himself for what happened to both Norik and his own family in the fire. Neither event were Jarvis's fault. Their main friend group here in Zahmbieu, Cormac, Rildilga, Hadul, Jarvis, and Norik, were all a brotherhood of people who misfortune just so happened to favor. The drop felt long. The screams of over 200 people being feasted on by the menacing ooze or crashing into the bottom of the sinkhole pounded into Cormac's head like a hammer before he died, by having his own skull cracked against a boulder and the silent embrace of death, warmed by his own blood, was a much welcomed release. The next familiar face to meet their end, Chef Grill Redium, a boisterous, volume-control challenged, red dragonborn with a big-ass heart and a warm passion for cooking. But none appreciated him more than the titled moonshine of Zahmbieu herself, Rahana. He cared not a single fuck of the big ooze suddenly looming over him and the crowd. His eyes were peeled out over the town, searching frantically for that very dancer whom he considered like a daughter. But as the sinkhole unveiled itself under his feet, his heart sank. Not due to the sudden fall, but from not being able to confirm that Rahana was safe. Grimly assuming he was about to meet his end, he prayed for her safety, and hoped the blossomed woman he met when she was a starving teen on the street, that she would be able to eat and enjoy the last meal he made and packed in the fridge for her. It just so happened he put the extra effort in to make her favorite, as she was already having an awful week with the North Pole burning down and being demoted to a housekeeper. The looming ooze that writhed in freefall with all the other victims, simply devouring the residents like droves of insects about to meet a highway windshield. The monster turned itself in the direction of Grill's, its barely glowing yellow eye being the only horrifying thing able to be perceived. Refusing to go down without a fight, Grill grumpily jokes,
"I'd rather die a flattened pancake than be a fucking worm's appetizer. Come at me, dickface."
As the monster whipped its menacing tongue towards him, Grill unleashed a 30-foot clear shot of his booming fire breath. And that would be the last time the victims of the sinkhole would see the light again. Though it wasn't a pleasant sight, as this far down the walls were populated with demonic-looking rabid fungi creatures that insidiously hissed and screeched, cowering and shriveling away from the light and the heat of the flames. It was a bizarre last sight, that at least worked to scorch the tongue of the fucking ooze, as it recoiled away from Grill to search for more vulnerable airborne targets. He got the last laugh here, and so waved off the ever-shrinking light from the tunnel opening. Eventually, Grill crashed into a jagged edge, pinning and hanging him by the ribs, where he grinned with contempt, gave one last solemn goodbye to Rahana and his friends, and eventually died. And then after Grill, we moved to one of the most cherished town residents, Hadul Anvilbraid. The positive attitude, give everyone a chance, believe in change and seize the day kind of guy with a TBI. He always tried to look out for everyone, despite his own mistreatment. Hadul's usually kind demeanor utterly soured, as he witnessed the groups of awakened ones goading for a slaughter, while they chanted on behalf of the Greater Mother. Contrasting that display with the many people Hadul has cared for in this town, whom wore faces of fear, distress, and uncertainty. At seeing this, Hadul began to shake with an anger not felt in a long time. His fists clenched as his unclipped nails bled into his palm, but his jaw quivered loosely in sadness as he slowly pieced together an unfortunate realization. He had been duped. Hadul sternly closed his eyes to internally confront his hunch.
You told me a new world was possible. One where we all could have peace and prosperity if we were willing to fight for it. Tell me, is this what you meant by fight for it, Greater Mother?
The Greater Mother's voice dripped into Hadul's mind with the impression of an unmasked siren.
To achieve a better world, the current one must be destroyed. Tolerating the intolerable only empowers the other side to continue spreading their misery. It leaves the cycle of violence in perpetual motion.
Tears start to fill Hadul's angry gaze, but he responds bravely with a tone of stark defiance.
Rodilga said something like that once, but I know this awful stuff is not what she meant. This is not what you insinuated. Good people, wonderful people, about to get hurt because of you. This might bring about some new order. But it won't be a new world. It'll be the same shit with less color. I never should have trusted you. I should have told someone I was sick. But you tricked me into thinking I was special. God damn it, you said anyone who wanted a better world would find salvation. But you're just a plague of lying filth.
Hadul's knees buckled as the anxiety hit his body faster than his mind, clutching his head, desperate to right his wrongs that he was genuinely not aware of. The shame stabs at his chest, as only now can he admit to himself that part of the reason he didn't speak up was he didn't want to be otherized any further than his condition already caused. He didn't want to be a burden. He knows his friends don't view him like that, but accessibility was not a part of this company town's design, and so he struggled. Hadul had convinced himself that he had enough self-control, that it seemed the Greater Mother was likely a misunderstood person, just like him and his friends. She gave him the false hope he could become strong and give back to a world that cared enough to not leave people like him behind in the dust. That he could maybe become somebody like the legendary bear killer that he idolized for saving his home village years ago. Perhaps Hadul would have spoken up sooner had Jarvis and Cormac not tried so hard to protect him from knowing of Jarvis's worsening condition. Hadul is a plenty capable man who just needed a different set of tools that no one here was either willing or able to supply, leaving him to be chronically infantized and celebrated for simple achievements that he secretly resented. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Hadul's feelings are more than understandable, and the Greater Mother took advantage of that fact.
I'm sorry to hear that. No, my child, you were a big help to me, and I appreciate you allowing me to use your sight to see my missing son up close in his carefree, unfiltered state, as I did not expect him to be here. Allowing me to hold his hand through yours was a kind gift that I will forever cherish. I thank you for helping me confirm this revelation so that I could come in the flesh and greet him myself. However, if this is how you view me, then sadly you're now a threat to my ability to repair our relationship.
I have no more use for you.
I will try to make your death quick and painless. Please,
do not resist.
The earth splits beneath Hadul's buckled kneecaps, but he is too stunned at the realization of the Greater Mother's words to react much. He He simply accepts his falling body wide-eyed as the screams collapse into and echo out of the sinkhole. As the unfortunate dwarf drops into freefall and his greatest insecurity stabbed into, his tears take his vision away more so than the darkness does. He shouts, apologizing in agonizing remorse and desperation.
I'm sorry, Tarth! I didn't know it was gonna end up like this. I really didn't know, I swear. I had no idea. I only wanted to be helpful. Oh gods, what have I done? I thought this was gonna be a happy reunion. I thought she was gonna help us all. I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry.
Hadul is referring to a very brief part of a conversation he had with Tarth and the party the evening the North Pole was burned down. After confirming Thotham was indeed the local folk hero that helped save his village and family, then Hadul took the good-intentioned opportunity to ask about the party's families. Tarth shared it's been a long time since he saw his parents, and was looking forward to figuring out his lack of a contract so he could make sure his mom was okay, and try to help his pops who he believes is in a bad predicament. The mom Tarth was referring to was, of course, not the same mom. Hadul was convinced he was helping to warmly and secretly reunite someone as strangely magical as Tarth with that unnervingly long magical nose. It made enough magical sense in Hadul's head that Tarth's mother would be someone strange, endearing, and powerful, like this greater mother. His believed connection between her and Tartholomew, who showed him such kindness, fueled his trust and belief in her, a rather unfortunate chain of events. As Hadul continues his descent into the darkness, he sobs, terrified that Tarth could likely get hurt and it all be his own fault. Searching desperately in his mind for some final hope to cling onto before death, which is when the fire of Grill's breath weapon illuminated the sinkhole, beckoning Hadul's eyes to witness the strong dragonborn taking a last stand against the ooze hand that was actively feasting on their fellow neighbors. It was in seeing this bravery that Hadul stopped being afraid and smiled, instinctively reaching up to his own arm to feel for the tattoo honoring his folk hero, Thotham. And it was here Hadul found hope.
Thotham will save Tarth. He is a beacon of justice and a natural-born hero.
Hadul was content with this thought, but she, for some reason, insisted on disproving his hope even moments before his death, as her influence slithered into his mind one final time, informing him,
My son does not need saving from me,
but from those who have convinced him of such nonsense. This Thotham you idolize.
he and I have touched long ago.
He is the most vulnerable to me out of my son's new cohorts.
Hadul does not let this information, be it true or not, faze him, speaking as if there is nothing else in this world that he is more sure of in this moment. He smiles warmly in the face of death, as memories of Thotham and the rest of the party's kindness, skill, and determination wash over him in a flood of inspiration, recalling all of your collective actions throughout this nightmare, and how it left he and the strikers feeling better supported, protected, and awestruck at the party's willingness to let the negative attention fall onto themselves. These valiant efforts, let alone the maladaptive cocktail fiasco or even the recent rescue mission, were a display of brave solidarity the strikes could never forget. If only they weren't all about to die now. In this darkness, Hadul can't see the monstrous beast aiming and opening its mouth around his small body, but he can feel the humidity and smell an uncomfortable mustiness as he shouts his defiant last words.
Good! I have no doubts then. Thotham and Tarth are both fated to stop you. And if they ain't strong enough alone, then Miss Lux, Miss Mimith, and Gwibble will be there to pick up the slack and save 'em. I've watched them achieve great things when working together, and I'll be watching them from afar. Watching them become not just folk heroes, but possibly real heroes. They are gonna stop you.
Despite Hadul's death coming with regrets, his belief in the player party allowed him to die with a smile, hope, and a prayer, as the monster's piercing teeth sunk into him, biting him nearly in half, from skull to hip, split near perfectly down the middle of his brain and spine. His death was cruel, but instant and physically painless, just as the Greater Mother promised. As the rest of Zahmbieu stared in shock of the plunged crowd, the party too having witnessed Cormac, Grill, and Hadul in towards the edges. Grief smacked them in an instant wave, but this was only the beginning. A horn blew. Then, armed militias of awakened ones began advancing on the residents of the town, chanting ominously while carrying torches into the night. Intimidated by the pillar of blood ascending from the town's center, The unprepared residents rushed to take cover in the corners of town, hoping to escape through lesser-traveled alleyways. Sadly, too many people had the same idea, and ended up creating a partial crowd crush, resulting in being surrounded on most sides by enemies, which allowed them to hasten their slaughter. The portion of the public able to backtrack out of the alley, such as the party's beloved mentor, the charmingly flamboyant Gregis, found themselves confronting a much bigger threat, as a large, blacker-than-black beam shot from the blood pillar and extended into the sky, causing the risen pool to rupture, sending blood to rain down over the suffering town. After a few moments, the jet-black beam cascaded back onto itself, revealing another far larger rip through the earth at its base. And somehow, amidst this chaotic bloodshed, the earth stood still as an undeniably powerful entity approached. Enlarged, pale, and monstrously boned hands with red claws reached out from the new opening, testing the strength of the surface before gripping and thrusting the rest of her form up from the abyss. Finally making her fabled and feared appearance, the Greater Mother, Zugtmoy. The ghostly white-complexioned woman of an unknown race, though seeming to somewhat resemble a mix of the mycelia of the Fae, but with the stature of giants that Goliaths are believed to have hailed from. One might mistake her for wearing a scarlet dress, but it's actually a part of her fungal flesh. Millions of living fibrous tendrils, wiggling and worming as they stretch themselves outward and away, only to retract back and cling to her body once more like children fearful of independence. Her hair, much like that of Medusa, but instead of snakes, its many thousand strands of writhing fungal fibers dancing along her skull and shedding bioluminescent spores. The Greater Mother is at first glance hauntingly beautiful, but at closer inspection, eerily terrifying, and clearly alien. Zugtmoy raised a commanding hand toward the sky as dark clouds began to crowd and block the moonlight, glowing energy amassing into her hand, then cusping it towards her lips, she blew, like the sprigs of a dandelion. Luminescent particles dispersed throughout all of Zahmbieu. Inside each living mind within these tortured walls, a unique telepathic message was delivered, halting the town's slaughter for but a few precious moments, as Zugtmoy gave her final offers to those resisting her reign, including that of our player party. First, Zugtmoy telling Thotham that they had touched before, and offered to give him enough power to deliver the justice he also deserves. That is, if he accepts her as his mother. But Thotham declined, citing he had no qualms with being estranged from his parents, and no interest in changing that fact. Besides, he would not side with such evil that his god would clearly scorn. Then, Zugtmoy telling Lux that her mother, Lilith, has a greater purpose, but chose otherwise. Lux pressed for more information, to which Zugtmoy assured would be given, if Lux accepted her as her new mother instead. Then, she would show Lux how to harness her untapped talents. But Lux declined. She demands proof of payment whenever possible. And besides, she carves her own path. Zugtmoy then, seeming to congratulate Mimith on having found a new mom, the replacement for the one who died after giving birth. Mimith's new adoptive mom, being one and the same as Tarthelemiu's biological mother, something Mimith had started to suspect when they first met in Zahmbieu, and now has been confirmed. And it now becomes a little more clear on how they potentially were able to connect into their shared dream. Though calling it a dream at this point doesn't feel quite accurate. Just what was that whole thing? It still remains a mystery. Anyhow, Zugtmoy didn't seek to recruit Mimith, only asked her to convince Tarth's mother, Marintavia, or Mari for short, to reject Tarth. She already has Mimith. She does not need more kids than that. But Mimith declined, citing in contempt that she was going to do everything she could to bring Tarth back to his real home and his real mother, who is a kind, warm, and loving woman. The Greater Mother didn't seem all too fazed to be rejected by the party. That is, up until she encountered our beloved child goblin, Gribble. Looking around, he could see from the captured gazes that others were receiving some kind of message of sorts. But his reception, for lack of a better term, seemed rather slow to connect, until, eventually, a foreign entity forced itself into his mind. Although once she entered, The instant regret was unspoken but palatable. Gribble could feel her trembling within his skull, nervously as the opposing pressure of two powerful forces occupying this child's headspace became absolutely dizzying. But thankfully for him, that didn't last very long, as Gribble's benefactor threateningly spoke.
Don't even try it, bitch.
The mental whirlwind that just resulted from either the rapid retreat or forced exit of Zugtmoy by the goddess Dea was whiplash-inducing to say the least. But a physical relief after the fact, as Dea remained to speak in her more casual demeanor.
Oops, did I overstep your right to agency just now, little dragon? So sorry if I did.
Gribble cutely shrugged his shoulders, stating he was fine with it, and had no interest in whatever the creepy mommy lady had to say anyway. Dea's smug smile could be felt, but not seen as she spoke again.
Excellent. That witch's audacity just now, at the very least, allowed me to tap into some illuminating information. But alas, I'll have to wait to share more until our next communion. And, oh, by the way, dear Gribble, don't lose track of that Harangon, Tarth. I now have reason to believe he will be a crucial asset in your journey to transforming into a true dragon. Play nice with him, and get yourself safely out of there. Until again we meet.
With Gribble's mind now clear of outside influences, he spun to look around town, seeking visual confirmation of his friend Lux, but now also the chaotic rabbit man he apparently needs to latch himself onto, of which that very rabbit man had his own correspondence with his years-long captor, the very one he had hoped to never face again. A clammy sweat soaked his fur despite the chill in the desert air. Zugtmoy telling him how much she had missed Adam, and how happy she is to see how strong he has grown. Though vocalized her disappointment in his choice of friends, that seemed to be a negative influence in her own opinion. Tarth gulped, nervously stating he respected her as a powerful and terrifying being, but wanted nothing more than to be free. Oddly, Zugtmoy didn't fight back against this, stating she herself would not intervene in his nor his newfound cohort's escape, if they could make it out past her minions. She strangely acknowledged that, if you love something,
You let it go.
but Zugtmoy pressed to Tarth that he cannot outrun fate, and that he will, in time, eventually find himself running right back to her. Tarth shakily thanked the Greater Mother, and with his severe doubt that he'd willfully come running back to her, he essentially responded semi-sarcastically with, "Cool, Kate, thanks, bye." The Greater Mother may have offered this smallish courtesy to Tarth and the player party, but as for the rest of the residents of Zahmbieu, after Zugtmoy arrived, the bodies started to hit the floor and drop like flies, to demonstrate her personal threat level, loud and clear. Zugtmoy possessed a mass of people, one of which was the party's beloved mentor, Grigus. Caught under her spell, he entrancedly walked towards the Greater Mother. Once in range, she oppressively struck down nearly the entire crowd with a psychic blast that rapidly vibrated their fragile skulls. Tragically, even though Grigus was hit to a lesser extent than others in the crowd, with the other injuries he had sustained thus far, it was still a lethal shot. Blood started to pour down from his ears, and they collapsed, feeling woozy, as his vision started to spin. He managed to crawl himself through the sand and pitifully hunch into a corner nook among collapsed debris, to decay in peace.
I suppose dying while fighting a potentially historic tragedy is far more aesthetic than having my cute-ass plop and sploot on a stage. Thank you for that, Lux. Sorry I couldn't pay it forward, and sorry for apparently wasting your efforts. I guess that makes me a terrible mentor, huh? Oh well, at least I had the right intentions.
Using the last of his physical energy, he reached for an inner blouse pocket, pulling from it a magical stone, most precious to them. Grigus clung the stone against his growingly pale face, allowing themselves a gentle stream of relieved yet remorseful tears, as they poured their passionate heart out one final time.
Oh, my darling Cassius, I can still feel your warmth and beating heart alive and strong. I am so relieved I get to feel this one last time, even if it's just from a silly rock and not the real thing. But alas, my love, I wish you never brought us these sweet things. I worry what will become of you the moment you notice my flame has been snuffed out.
A sharp pressure in his skull begins radiating pain down their neck as the blood condenses into a fierce tension headache. Perhaps as an attempt to cope, his mind starts manifesting a minor delusion, convincing Grigius that Cassius is sitting right beside him, a warmly welcomed presence.
Darling, please don't look at me in this sorry state. I don't want you to remember me this way. I can barely take looking at your sad, sunken eyes right now, my love. It hurts. I deeply feel your pain. If roles were reversed, I don't know that I could survive your absence.
Using the hand not holding the stone, Grigius tries to reach up to touch the face of the illusion, but his arm is too numb to respond. He chokes up sadly.
Honey, please listen closely. As much as I love drama and the most typical cliches of romance, I'd never want you to take your life. You hear me, babe? Never. Trust me, love. I despise the very idea of someone so kind, warm, gentle, and yet determined as you are, being left alone. I could not stand to be in your shoes. Please forgive your beloved silver vine for being too fragile to remain.
Unwelcome clarity returns to Grigius as the wind gently carries a stream of sand that wisps away the false vision of Cassius, causing poor Grigius's body to intensely wince as their pain comes surging back into a frigid crescendo.
Dear gods, I know I'm not one for prayer. And you probably think this is pretty audacious of me to do at the very last minute. But I've mostly fucking hated my life. Hated being born a shameful first-gen tiefling. Hated my own family. That is, until I made a new family of my own. I learned to speak up. I learned to trust, be vulnerable, and love deeply. I don't know if you powerful cosmic sky people give a damn. Certainly doesn't seem so. But just in case you do, and just in case you're anything like me, and get off on proving pathetic vermin such as I wrong. My dying wish is for you to help convince Cassius that he must keep fighting. My kitten, my soulmate, do not come for me. Run, don't look back. You must escape this misery. Then, when you're out of here and back on your feet, you can pour me a glass at the table one last time. A nice stiff tequila, please. But after that, you must promise the chair that holds my absence that you will find a way to redefine happy.
A darkness in Grigius's vision begins to rapidly encroach their sight of the living world. He manages to shift his head once more to softly kiss the stone holding Cassius's heartbeat. Grigius's ears, now entirely deafening to the slaughter surrounding them as his final thoughts were experienced in his still living body, but left unspoken as his soul starts uncomfortably being torn away.
You're too sweet to focus yourself on revenge, babe. Leave the dirty work to someone else. There are boundless people who can't resist poking their nose into shit. You know the type. People like my good-natured but endearingly fucking chaotic mentees. Heck, maybe it will be them. Wouldn't that be a kicker? Fuck it. I'm rooting for them. Who cares if I'm wrong? I'm dead. Be free, my love. I'll be watching the show from afar. Farewell, Zahmbieu. Farewell, my beloved Cassius. Know that I'm content, simply ever having known your warmth.
Throughout the entire duration of the massacre thus far, Cassius had kept anxiously patting the side pocket of his pants, chronically checking for the pulse of his beloved through the stone. But when that pulse went silent, the tabaxi froze in place. Typically, Cassius is an expert under pressure, but he was rapidly faltering now, desperately pulling out the stone to double confirm its lifelessness. The revelation rattling Cassius's ability to optimally reason, as his razor-focused, sharp feline eyes scoured the town in a rage. Despite the bloody chaos in the present bleak existence, Grigius's bright, peacock-colored silk robe made their sad forms stand out like a fallen angel among a mass of beached fish. Cassius's eyes fixated on comprehending the state of his love with blood seeming to be all over his precious face. Further seeing that not even in death did Grigius let go of Cassius's stone. The sight causing the panther tabaxi to instinctively to grasp his chest as he struggled to control his breath, baring his fangs at the injustice and coming from the deepest depths of his most enraging primal instinct. Cassius summoned forth a guttural and behemoth roar. It startled and scared many civilians in his vicinity, but thankfully this also caught the attention of Rahana, who recognized instantly the roar of her clearly wounded friend. Ready to pounce at lightning speed for his love and fight to death all he could, but Rahana leapt to snatch Cassius's leg in time. She desperately and sternly pleaded with her grieving and bloodlusting friend, telling him that he must keep fighting. Rahana fiercely pressed that Grigius would never forgive her if she let Cassius run straight to his death, for nothing more than a cold, limp body. Her words were as harsh as they were warm, and by some miracle, at least a piece of Grigius's dying wish was answered, as Cassius allowed himself to sink and sob for a moment under the comforting hands of his friend who cried alongside him. Crashes and screams continued to assault their ears gradually closer. Looking up one last time towards where Grigius lays delicately in the distance, Cassius affirms out loud his own living desire. "My gorgeous Grigius, if nothing else, mock my words. I will avenge you, even if I must tear the very sky down in order to do so. Wherever you are, keep my side of the bed warm for me, and sleep peacefully, my love." In spite of his heartbreaking, at each step further away he took from his sweet Grigius, the suffering panther continued his urgent escape while keeping somewhat close to his friend Rahana. Elsewhere, the Greater Mother peered into Tarth's mind again, trying to dig and learn who of the remaining residents she could potentially use as future emotional bait to lure him back. But as she dared crawl into his mind, she was met with a furious anger. "You already took him from me!" Tarth referring to poor Hadul, who the Harangon had started to share a brotherly compassion with. The emotional intensity of Tarth's despair was enough to surprise and push Zugutmoy firmly out of his head. Now convinced this was the wrong approach, the Greater Mother, instead, shifted her focus on indiscriminate, broad-ranged, lethal attacks that would simply hasten the outcome of this macabre ritual. But along the same escape path as Rahana and Cassius, Mercedes, the liberal journalist from the Illamont Times, was the next familiar face to decease from a psychic blast. Mercedes' final moments spent wondering how differently things would have went if only her boss had been decent enough to give her time off to grieve the death of her friend, Gikarin Sliverfell. The journalist recalls the evening before Sliverfell's death, hearing the elven heiress discuss wanting to start her own company town. Run by women, just for women. She wanted Mercedes to quit her job to join her on the profitable endeavor, to escape the incompetence of men. But Mercedes declined, as she had always wanted to be a journalist. In these final moments, Mercedes wondered how differently her life would have been had she herself not tolerated so much bullshit her family conditioned her to believe was normal. Realizing despite having her dream job, she was an unwitting pawn for a greater power's filtered content to the very end, and here her body will rot. Simultaneous to Mercedes' death, Dalara, the conservative journalist, was also hit in the blast. She held such contempt for what she believed was the selfish workers of Zahmbieu, believing they had to be the ones responsible for all this agony. So, with her final bit of strength, she threw an acid vial at a group of innocents before a horde of newly summoned zombies of the Greater Mother plunged to ravage her. And simultaneous to both Dalara and Mercedes' deaths, unfortunately, Rahana, the lovely moonshine of Zahmbieu, was struck down. Cassius managed to just barely evade the range of the Greater Mother's psychic blast. But seeing Rahana suddenly stunned and dizzily crashing down, he ran back for her. But as he approached, she slapped his hand away, affirming sternly that she could tell she was already done for. Despair choking him up once more, the last kindness Cassius could offer his rapidly weakening friend was to pull out the lunch from her bag so she could eat the last supper that Grill had prepared for her. Cassius lingered miserably to witness her last moments of life, as she tearfully ate but just a few small bites of their missing dragonborn comrades' food. Cassius had worked side by side with Grill for many years in this town as chef and bartender of the Leaky Tap Tavern, taking a moment to fondly reflect on their friend group's shared time here, never falling for management's attempts to convince workers like themselves that they were a higher tier of the hierarchy than the servants. This squad saw the servants as equals, of which their struggle needed their support and solidarity. In the trimester leading up to this dreadful week, Jarvis had gave to Cassius Oryxian's name while stating a favor was owed by this fellow, and that he may be able to get them help with their suspicion that servant debts were being arbitrarily increased. Thus, the squad concocted a plan. Knowing the mail in Zahmbieu was being secretly read, censored, and filtered, Rahana penned a pleading letter with intrinsic detail of the injustice towards servants, using a more complex form of thieves' cant language, just to be safe. Grigius and Grill created an overdramatic scene to distract the guards, as they pretended Grill burned a shrieking Grigius's clothing off, butt naked. And as the outgoing mail was being carried off towards the opening gates, Cassius pretended to be running toward Grigius, but intentionally colliding into the mail carrier and knocking the shipping box over. Cassius feigned being deeply apologetic while offering to help the flustered worker, and then sleight-of-handed their letter successfully into the outgoing mail, which later came into Oryxian and Moravi's hands, as they applied to be temporary police officers for Zahmbieu, and had organized through another friend the means to have Gribble and Lux's criminal sentences transferred here. And then, in the dark of the night, an adorable prowling mouse, Tawidi, made sure to stack the servant contracts so the player party would be assigned to their inside informant, Grigius. And that was what got this entire crazy operation started months before the player party even arrived. But interrupting the warmth of his nostalgia, Cassius realized he had become distracted, as the voices of hundreds of terrified screams boomed, pounding in from all directions as if alerting to a new danger incoming. Cassius turned back to see poor Rahana, as the last bit of food had fallen from her bleeding lips, one hand of hers placed limply on his, as if giving a soft and silent goodbye. Her warm amber eyes dulled and coldly glazed over. Struggling to steady his breath while shaking, the tabaxi helped respectfully lay her body down as his strained throat sobbed, distressing over how he could not do even this much for his sweet Grigius, and how he could do nothing more for his dear, wise friend Rahana. Cassius closed the beautiful dancer's soft eyelids and moved a large, heavy stone slab to hopefully cover and protect the peace of her body from the immoral eyes of their enemies. Looking down at what remained of her lunch, Cassius allowed himself a single taste of the date nut bread pudding Grill had prepared. Feeling both unsure and doubtful that his dragonborn friend was going to make it out of this hell, sought to enjoy what indeed turned out to be the last taste of his boisterous friend's cooking. To continue his pursuit of escape, Cassius leapt through the alley and turned the corner. His exit was blocked by a fresh horde of hungry, spore-leaking zombies that placed his life in imminent danger. On the other side of this nightmare town, despite sustaining injuries, Tawidi managed to successfully get the town's gates opened, while a wounded Oryxian, along with a bullish Moravi, continued their assault of hunting down the archers trying to barrage down on the innocents of town and defenseless Tawidi. Nearby, after having seen the gates finally opened, Little Legs didn't stop Gribble from fucking beelining it towards the exit faster than any other person in town. I mean, hey, he's just a kid and pretty squishy. Case in point, Gribble was quickly brought to half health after being slashed into from behind by a horde. Our favorite fire-loving goblin paused his escape to mockingly turn towards and deliver a shaman's level of retribution, as blue flames were summoned grandly forth from his being. He chanted a blessed curse that scorched his undead enemies into low-quality shoe leather. As a secondary condition to his goblin song, blessed allies in range could enjoy some fire resistance, the effect reaching Tawidi up above him, which did actually protect her from taking extra damage that a flaming arrow would have inflicted. Confused, the little gnomish druid stared over the walkway, witnessing her dear dragon friend unleash his epic flames onto his enemies, of which massively outnumbered him. Yet they crumbled before him. She clapped her hands ecstatically, grateful for his gift in this moment, as she believed it to be a symbol of a truce from their earlier squabbling.
Gribble the dragon lives and breathes. I is so happy. Blessings from Sylvania.
Elsewhere, Zolnar, the fighting referee, was selflessly trying to protect and carry out the now legless Jarvis to safety. The horrors witnessed by Jarvis thus far unfortunately left his already struggling mind further addled at sorting what was reality from what was the greater mother's influence as the delirium began to rapidly devour his mind. Jarvis ended up biting at Zolnar to force his release, hoping the referee would have better chances at saving himself. However, the last time anyone saw Zolnar, he and many others were surrounded by several murderous hordes. His status remains unknown. But Jarvis's body tumbled and whipped directly in the path of a storming crowd of chasing enemies. Mimith was close by enough to witness Jarvis's incoming demise, but too gridlocked into a battle of her own to try and help. Jarvis fought against the growing urge and intrusive thoughts that compelled him to desire the greater mother. With all the mental fortitude he could possibly muster in this state, Jarvis aggressively pushed through the greater mother's influence, allowing his final moments of life to cling to the memories that were still born of his own agency. Between the space of buildings where he pathetically lay, he stared at the collapsed detention center on the other side of town with deep remorse, just the same as Cormac did.
All along, Rildilga, you were right. My desperation for repentance and peace left us all far more vulnerable than I could have ever realized. Your brilliance went to waste because of me, Rildilga. It's my fault you're gone, just like it's my fault Norik and my family are gone. I'm sorry, I'm such a fuck-up.
He licks his lips, thirsty and dehydrated, as his throat and lungs wheeze and strain from the sand being kicked into the air and inhaled. Jarvis tries to gather his thoughts to pray for Cormac, but his memory slips away as the greater mother's influence strips him of that person, devouring one fond memory and person at a time, so as to tempt him into a loneliness that cannot resist her once there is nothing but her. Managing to chase his stream of consciousness into another direction away from Zugdmoy, Jarvis becomes a bit mind-addled as he believes himself to be back in his old apartment before it burned down, and yet chatting happily with his precious friend Hadul. The timelines of Jarvis's existence inconsistently stringing themselves together.
Hadul, you were right about that Thotham guy. Did he tell you, by the way? Tell you that his mentor was the very same mentor of one of the legendary Dawn Chasers. Hadul, my friend, those are my heroes. In fact, just like your bear killer tattoo, I also have a tattoo. It's down the side of my leg. It says, "Chase the next dawn." What a weird coincidence, right, my friend? Look, Hadul, look, you see?
Jarvis reflexively reaches for his leg to show Hadul his tattoo, before suddenly remembering he lost his legs. And the apartment starts to break out into a fire and burn, as the fire that took Jarvis's family now takes his short-lived comforting fantasy. Jarvis's hands tremble, reaching out to the smiling image of his dear friend Hadul. From behind him, Rildilga is somehow there too, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder, and from beside him, another faceless dwarf who he painfully can't recall the name of, but knows instinctively it's someone important to him. The three of them open their mouths to speak to Jarvis, but he can hear nothing but the crackle of the flames consuming his home, the only sound managing to reach him, a gentle meow, as he looks down to see his family's beloved orange tabby cat, Whiskey, staring back up at him longingly with its bright green eyes. Jarvis chokes up, swooning in memory, remembering the infinite love and forgiveness a beloved pet would give to its owner. He quickly reaches down to pet the feline, its soft fur still strong in his memory as it purrs beneath his fingertips. But then a heart-dropping and familiar girl's voice calls to the cat. Whiskey walks towards the exit door of the burning apartment, towards the person calling him, turning back to stare at Jarvis one last time, as it slowly winks at him before walking through and disappearing. Jarvis's jaw hangs for a moment, as a thought both haunts and gives him hope.
Oh dear, Whiskey, my old friend. I don't deserve your company, and yet here you came to me, just to show me that you still loved me. Perhaps I'm once again a fucking fool to hope. I thought you all dead, but if somehow you're telling me that you and my little Amelia survived that fire, then this knowledge is truly the greatest gift I could ever have asked for. I am beyond words. You've made a bitter old stoic man like me cry. I don't know if the rest of our family wants anything to do with me, but you, Whiskey, gave me the courage to try and find out. And with the support of my friends here, I'll do my best not to disappoint you. Thank you, Whiskey. You're the best cat a grumpy old man could ask for. But my time is up now, isn't it, folks? Goodbye, Zahmbieu. Goodbye, cruel world. I'm finally moving on.
Jarvis moves his blissfully shattering gaze back to his three friends as they come close to hold him. And it is here, somehow in death, Jarvis decides to accept, despite believing he doesn't deserve forgiveness, that he has suffered enough and should be allowed to be happy with his friends. And Jarvis, thankfully, dies peacefully, just moments before the horde stampedes his soulless body. Not too far away, poor Thotham was grabbed by one of the ooze hands and left tangoing with it in a miserable cycle of grab, escape, etc. Falling on his ass a couple times, earning himself a rather sore tailbone, he's a bear killer, not a monster hunter after all. Unlike Mimith, who after witnessing the death of Jarvis and was herself surrounded on all sides by enemies that had just tore into the innocence of Zahmbieu like fucking vegetables. She ragefully unleashed a lethal, natural 20 with a single adrenaline-filled swing. Mimith decimated the entire front line of a horde, their blood spraying to turn the sand into an abstract painter's canvas. Thanks to focused support from Lux, who was sinking her crossbow bolts into the feral towering hand, Thotham was eventually fully freed, and figured out he was more useful helping to flank an enemy horde that was trying to corner innocents into their gruesome deaths. Thotham's new strategy managed to help secure a path that the deeply wounded People's Unity journalist, Gorham, was able to use to escape an onslaught of pain. The two men then rushed toward the now open exit gates, but were cut off by an obstructive horde of undead. This ended up being no issue for our hunky cleric, though, who was able to channel his divinity learned from the teachings of his righteous mentor, Ulfgar Thorin, under the compass of the God of Justice. A holy light beaming from the darkened night sky came shining down upon Thotham, as he strongly held his holy symbol and sent the undead fleeing from him while the group of innocents behind him ran for the exit. Gorham remained by our enamoring cleric, having no shame in respecting the clear and true alpha here.
Damn, dude. If it's all right with you, I'ma stick close by your flashy ass and just let you lead the way.
And so, the two gentlemen stuck close to each other, Thotham leading the way where more enemies awaited to obstruct their path, while the wounded journalist watched their backs as he protectively clung to the physical evidence he had obtained of the massacre thus far. Elsewhere, Tartholomew could see hordes blocking off the first set of two exit gates and another horde dragging itself into a major alleyway, which is where Cassius was about to struggle for his life, being slowly backed toward the wall by a horde of undead. But darting into heroic action, Tarth used his bunny hop to lunge and leapt for the top of the slippery 10-foot fences beside the first set of blocked gates. Then cut off 10 feet of his own rope to tie securely around a rusted notch in the bars. Calling down to Cassius, Tarth presses him to make a narrow run for the fence and climb. Cassius now, graciously seeing the new escape route, pounced, quite literally, like no tomorrow, managing only to sustain a small backstrike from the famished horde that otherwise could not keep up with them. The cat and rabbit boys popped down the other side of the fence together, where Lux was, sinking more crossbow bolts into the putrid flesh of the horde, blocking entry to the front courtyard. Around the same time, Thotham and Gorham came to help flank the enemies opposite Lux and Cassius. Lux, in elegant, roguish fashion, she landed blow after blow from behind and rapidly tore down the stinking mass into mere table scraps. Tarth darted towards the stables to free the very horses that unveiled the cruel reality of Zahmbieu to the party. Lux gracefully slid herself up onto Buki, successfully riding the steed as she snagged Gribble's hood to pull him up alongside her, while Tartholomew managed to swiftly dodge a violent kick from Bad Boy and cut him free of his reins. Our sweet Harangon, with no time for a ritual, tried earnestly to inform Bad Boy that they learned his beloved owner, Clarabelle Montefiore, was still alive. Bad Boy charged toward the exit, mostly overwhelmed from all the commotion and devastation. Nearby, Moravi was sliding down from a rope on the wall, carrying a heavily bloodied Oryxian over one shoulder, and had a few arrows poking out of her other shoulder. Spotting the steed in range, Moravi opportunely released herself from the rope to land on Bad Boy, who mightily neighed in disapproval and tried to unsuccessfully thrash them off. But the mighty half-orc woman commanded its respect and steered it towards their collective freedom, them able to get out of here just before the incoming crowd of survivors started colliding at the exit, desperate to escape. Arriving late, covered in blood, though thankfully not her own, Mimith held back a froth-mouthed horde of undead from closing in on the courtyard, while Thotham guided straggling survivors to safety. Finally able to face each other, Gorham and Cassius light up in warm surprise to see they both have survived the massacre, sharing a fast brotherly embrace before they and the party dashed the final distance, sprinting past the headless remains of an enlarged and monstrously deformed Arakocra. It clearly being the pitiful, lifeless lump belonging to Chief of Police Bahal Kethus, his death secured by the criminal trio. Between casting, explosions, collapse, combat, and screams, it was nearly impossible to hear anything of value. Not even a double thaumaturgy could command their remotest of interest in this hellish level of chaos. But at least all remaining allies had sights on each other. The party escaped alongside Gorham, Cassius, and Buki too. Finally reaching freedom from the assault, from behind all of you, an endless chorus of suffering screams vibrated off the backs of your necks, coming from those who would not live to tell their stories. Who learns the truth is now ultimately up to Gorham, you, and the rest of the 77 survivors of this morbid massacre. In time, of course. Just as Tarth takes his first rabbit's foot outside the walls of Zahmbieu, the Greater Mother sends a foreboding message.
Remember, my child, you cannot outrun destiny. I can only hope someday you'll see my actions as the unfortunate
Necessary evil
that it is, especially as you come to understand the greater evil we're all up against. With sincere love in my heart, I'm letting you go.
for now.
I believe you will eventually see things
My way.
much like how I have come to better understand yours. Now knowing,
How strong you've become.
since we last were
Intertwined.
you have truly inspired me. Because of this, I'll beckon Eve to be freed. Understand this, Adam. Eve will be drawn to you. She will innately seek you out.
Do not fear.
I only ask that, given your current
Misconceptions.
misconceptions of me, that when you two
Finally meet.
that you view and judge Eve as her own individual.
Lastly.
Beware of the goblin and the gnome you've become acquainted with. Your destiny will inevitably
Conflict with.
theirs.
Don't say I didn't warn you.
Regardless of what Tarth would say to this, there is no further response from the Greater Mother. As the party makes haste from Zahmbieu that is still actively being assaulted from within. While running, Cassius faints. Gorham, who is too wounded to carry him, frantically shouts,
Shit, I can't fucking carry him. Someone help. Man down.
The high passive perception of Lux and Tarth can spot a woodpecker in the sky. Odd, considering woodpeckers are not native to the desert, so it must be Tawiti, flying quite unevenly, but nonetheless, flying in one piece. The young gnome as a woodpecker encircles around her uncle Gorham and the fallen tabaxi to draw attention to them, then flies outward off-road, away from the direction that most of the crowd is storming into, as she perches on a tall cactus, awaiting for Lux and friends to follow. It's obvious to the entire party that they need to get far away from Zahmbieu. However, folks, you don't have to follow Tawidi. You're not inside 100-foot imprisoning stone walls anymore.
You're free!
The party has 1 point of exhaustion at this time and is desperately in need of sleep. But otherwise, the adventure begins.